Primetime. Now from New York, Diane Sawyer.
Good evening. Tonight we have the kind of story you really don't want to believe. And then you hear that it happened to your friends, neighbors, people just like you. In recent years, psychologists have recognized the phenomenon of suppressed memory, suppressed sometimes by children because of a trauma simply too awful to remember. In the story you're about to see, the reawakened memory of one man forced a community, a church, and now a nation to face what happened back in the days when everyone wanted to look away. Countless people came forward with their home movies to help us tell this story, saying it may be too late to intervene in the past, but it's not too late to keep this from happening again.
It became our secret for 30 years.
We were all ashamed. We were all ashamed.
I see an innocent child living with a secret that was about to destroy his life.
It was a whole town's terrible secret.
That town with a secret is North Attleboro, Massachusetts, population 25,000. It's still a 1950s kind of place, where you can leave your doors unlocked, chat over the backyard fence, and center family life around the Catholic Church. No wonder Frank Louis Fitzpatrick never really wanted to leave. He became an investigator for an insurance company and created a family life like the one he knew growing up.
I have a family, yep. My wife and I and 2 kids, and a cat and fish.
Happy?
And no, I wasn't happy, but I should have been, and that's what started to make me remember, was that I realized that something was wrong.
As Fitzpatrick tells it, a dark shadow kept flickering over his picture-perfect life.
Somebody I love is doing something horrible to me was the first thing that came back to me, the pain in my brain said that.
A pain that under therapy kept drawing Fitzpatrick back 30 years to the innocent days of St. Mary's Grammar School. Back toward a young priest of great vitality and charm who became a kind of magnet for the children.
You know, I wanted to become a priest because I thought he was such a wonderful person.
He was Father James Porter, overseer of the altar boys, like Frank. He organized games for the children, and Fitzpatrick remembered even took them on trips.
He was supposed to be taking us to a game of some kind at Boston Garden. I remember being brought to this house. I looked out the window and I said, "Oh, where's Boston Garden?" And it wasn't in sight. I remember feeling strange.
At last, Frank Fitzpatrick had a memory that would unlock all the darkness in his life, of a day when a beloved priest would offer an unsuspecting little boy a strange-tasting piece of mincemeat pie.
Father Porter told me I should eat it too. You know, I was going to hurt his feelings if I didn't eat it, so I ate some more. And then, the next thing I knew, I woke up and Father Porter was laying on top of me, sodomizing me.
How old were you when it happened?
12.
It never occurred to you to tell anybody?
At that time, a priest was something that was so high above normal mortal human beings that it was not conceivable that we'd ever tell on a priest, because it was like, you know, how can you tell on God, you know?
You're 39 years old. These realizations come back to you. Was there a moment when you knew what you were going to do?
Yeah, right away. When I first started getting those feelings, I knew I had to do something to find out. Well, I'm a curious guy. I wanted to find out what happened to Porter.
So Frank Fitzpatrick, private investigator, set out on the trail of Father James Porter. First, he went to the diocese just to find out Porter's middle name, but the head of the diocese, Monsignor Oliveira, refused.
Monsignor Oliveira told me maybe it's best to leave it in the hands of the Lord, which had been done 30 years ago, and instead of the Lord's hands, it ended up in Father Porter's hands, and his hands were filthy.
So Fitzpatrick spent hours of his own time culling through documents, searching through old newspapers for any clue to Porter's whereabouts. He also placed a simple ad in the local paper, asking only, "Remember Father Porter?" Within days, a letter arrived. "Dear Frank," it said, what have you got?
I, for one, am very familiar with Father Porter and his antics, or should I say insanity. I, for one, have lost my faith and dignity because of this man.
Patty Shabbat Wilson, today a single mother who works with emotionally disturbed children, was the first to contact Fitzpatrick and tell him about a 10-year-old little girl at St. Mary's who was stalked repeatedly by Father Porter.
He locked the door at the rectory and would get me in there and have you sit on his lap, take your pants down. He'd have his tongue down your throat, his hands up your genitals. And I felt that there must be something wrong with me. You know, like I must be deformed to make someone want to come after me so much like this.
Did you tell anyone else?
I told my best friend, Judy. I said, Father Porter just did this to me. And she looked at me and she was stunned. She said, he did that to me, too.
I remember him pressing himself up against me.
His hands went up my legs.
Sweating and shaking.
Gasping and shaking. He shook.
One by one, the former children of St. Mary's decided to come forward.
He threw me on the floor and raped me once or twice a week.
Kept telling me that God was watching.
It was as if a violent tremor shot through the community, dislodging old memories. And the memories made it clear that here at the little school called St. Mary's, there was no place a child could be safe from Father Porter. Not the playground, not the rectory, not the sacristy, not the altar.
In his office in the rectory, in the basement of the rectory, in the vestibule of the church.
In the corridors at school, in the schoolyard, at the town pool, at the playground, wherever we were.
So far, more than 60 victims have given their names to Frank Fitzpatrick. 22 of them gathered together for us for the first time to tell the story. How 9, 10, 11-year-old children were forced into oral sex, anal sex, sometimes several children at once.
There had to be 8 or 9 kids, and he just took turns with us.
How many times did he molest me in my bedroom? I can't say 10, I can't say 15, I can't say 40. As many times, I would think, as he came into my house to eat meals, to socialize, to visit, he would molest me.
There's no one out there that can say, when they were alone with Porter, he wasn't trying to get his hands in your pants. Personally, I served a lot of Mass, and it was, you know, every time after Mass getting cornered, trying to get him away from you. Myself, 20 times minimum.
Mine happened when I was in the hospital. I was in an automobile accident. And he came to tell me that, that my uncle died. And that's when he started on me. And that was it was Columbus Day, 1960. I'll never forget it.
They are businessmen now, teachers, adults, but they say it was hard to come forward. And they tell us there are still countless more.
He didn't choose anybody in particular. He chose everybody. This guy destroyed hundreds of children's childhood. He took the child right out of them and ripped it out. I mean, he molested or raped every kid he could get his hands on.
But soon it became clear that Father Porter wasn't the only priest playing a role in their nightmares. John Robitaille had also repressed his memories 30 years when he was driving home recently, and a radio report on Frank Fitzpatrick mentioned Porter's name.
I heard the name Father James Porter, and I just started freaking out.
His classmates have told him that they remember seeing him lying bleeding on the shower floor. He remembers being one of Porter's favorites, raped once a week for nearly 2 years.
I'm standing there behind me, just pushing me against the tile. And wanting to get out of there and him not letting me.
And John Robitaille says there was someone else at the church, another priest, who looked in and saw him.
He saw me on the floor with Father Porter in the basement of the rectory. And rather than helping me, he turned his back and left. It was like the whole church turned their back on me and did nothing to help me.
It was Father Annunziata?
Yes, it was. And I had to serve Mass for that man afterwards, too. And I could never look him in the eye again.
Father Armando Annunziato, the other young priest at the parish. He was one of the first people Frank Fitzpatrick sought out in his search for Father Porter. But Annunziato told Fitzpatrick he was ignorant of it all, both Porter's whereabouts now and that he had only vague suspicions about Porter all those years ago. The people in this room say Annunziato was lying. How many of you know firsthand that Father Annunziato knew, that he saw?
Diane, he walked in while I was being raped by Father Porter on a wrestling mat. There was, for a moment, a little bit of hope that this might stop, and the door very slowly shut.
There's no way in the world that the priest in that office, in that rectory, didn't know what was going on.
Peter Calderon says Annunziato also interrupted him with Father Porter.
Porter jumped up and was pulling his pants on, and I can remember laying on the floor that I'm doing something bad. I'm the guy that has my pants down around my ankles with the priest on the other side of the door wanting to know what's going on. And this guy's on the other side of the door knowing what this guy's doing to me, and he doesn't bust the door down. He lets him continue to do what he was doing to me.
Father Annunziato, who presides over this church in Mansfield, Massachusetts, took a leave of absence after the story broke. So we tracked him down to try to get some answers for Father Porter's victims.
Just for a minute, please.
Thank you.
Father Annunziato, we've talked to some of Father Porter's victims, and they say that you walked in the room and you saw them being abused. They want to know why you didn't protect them. They trusted you.
While Father Annunziato remains silent as he did 30 years ago, the victims tell of lives wrecked by addiction and depression.
I have very little memory of my childhood prior to the spring of 1963 because I shut down. I'm very, very frightened because I have other dreams and like little glimpses, and I am very, very afraid of where that's going to take me.
I've spent 30 years building walls, losing my religion, losing my ability to make strong relationships, my ability to trust. That's what the story's about. It's about trust. It's about what happens when people betray trust. And I think every one of us here sits here in pain about that.
I attempted suicide 3 times.
And you're sure it was this?
This, there is no question. When the memories came back, I wanted to die more than ever.
And when we come back, some answers to the questions: where were the parents, where was the church, and where is Father Porter? 30 years ago, many of the parents of North Attleboro knew nothing about the daily nightmares their children faced. The children were ashamed, afraid to tell them. In a sense, those parents were victims too, not just of one priest, but a church that protected itself from scandal and seemed to show little pity for the children. Sex offenders in the church were rarely given up for prosecution. You'll see now what happened when some parents in that devout Massachusetts community asked their church to stop Father Porter, a man who reportedly even molested children with their parents nearby at home.
He came into my house, into my bedroom, with my parents on the other side of the wall, not even a door blocking the room, just an archway, and he would come in and sit on my bed and take my hand and put my hand down his pants. I couldn't get away from this guy.
That's Peter Calderon. This is his father, Joseph.
My wife insisted I not come this evening on account of my health. And I said, no, dear. I said, I couldn't live with myself. Knowing perhaps I could have done more in the past, after all these years, I said, I will not sit back now.
But Joseph Calderon did try 30 years ago when finally he suspected something was wrong. He tried to get help dealing with Father Porter from that other priest at the parish, Annunziato.
I put it right to him. I believe he's molesting the boys. Well, you know, you people must understand, he's human. I said, Father, you have the wrong. You forgot to put a prefix in there. He's inhuman.
Finally, in 1963, Calderon and a handful of other parents, each thinking they were alone, forced the bishop to move James Porter out of North Attleboro, only to discover now that the church simply placed him in a neighboring parish, Fall River, and then another one, New Bedford, where hundreds more children were available over the next 4 years.
They saved the children of North Attleboro, at least after a few hundred, they saved the children of North Attleboro, and then they damned the children of Fall River and subsequently New Bedford by sending them to them.
And critics say that's exactly the pattern of the Catholic Church over the years. According to one private study, as many as 6% of American priests may have trouble with pedophilia. That's 3,000 priests. Yet in the past, the Church has simply moved many of them from place to place, paying out huge sums in private court settlements to the victims, hoping, above all, to keep the whole thing hidden. The Church has paid out $400 million in legal fees since 1985, with the prospect of $1 billion.
The settlements I've heard of have been quite large, yes.
The Vatican Embassy refused our request for an interview. Only Father Kenise Connors, a psychologist and member of the National Catholic Conference of Bishops, would talk with us about why the Church moved Porter near children in other parishes all those years ago. What can possibly forgive that decision?
I can't think of anything would forgive it. All I can possibly put forward is the fact that at that time we know so little about the problem. At that time we had no idea of the extent.
But do you have to know about the problem in a sort of sophisticated way to know that this man is dangerous to children?
No, I don't think you need it in any sophisticated way.
Father Annunziato. There at the time, according to at least 3 of the people we talked to, walked in and saw exactly what was happening, shut the door, and did nothing. What should be done to him?
If it is true, then he was in collusion. If it's true, I think you'd have to answer now why he did that then. I don't know. That's very hard to hear.
In the meantime, even though the Church was still shutting every door in his face, Frank Fitzpatrick refused to give up on his search for James Porter. He finally got Porter's middle initial and Porter's father's name, William. Then one day, as he was poring through old newspaper files, he found in a newspaper an obituary. William Porter had died, the article said, leaving behind a son, James, who lived in Oakdale, Minnesota. So Fitzpatrick, private investigator, called information and got the telephone number, and then set up his tape recorder.
The decision to call Porter was really a decision to call his wife, to warn her to watch out and see if their children were being abused by him.
Porter had left the priesthood in 1967 and married. Since 1974, he'd been a house husband and tutoring children at a local church. He also has 4 children of his own.
Hello, can I speak to Mrs. Porter, please? Hello?
With his heart pounding, Frank Fitzpatrick said he had news about her husband.
But back in 60 to 63, he was at St. Mary's Church in North Attleboro, and I was at the neighboring grammar school. And back at that time, he sexually molested a number of children. Have you heard anything of this before?
No. I don't believe you anyway.
You don't believe me?
No.
Father Porter picked up the telephone and clearly knew the topic.
Hi, this is Frank Fitzpatrick.
Yes?
From North Attleboro.
Yeah?
So I just recalled some of the things that went on in North Attleboro. It just came back to me this past year and a half or so. My concern was whether you had received any treatment for your problem.
Yeah?
One question, why did you do that kind of thing?
Who knows?
Was it done to you as a child or something? Or?
No, that's the thing that was finally figured out. That we don't know.
You have anything to say to me about it? You know,
What can I say?
you're sorry?
Am I? Of course. Very. Very, very, very. That's why it was taken care of.
He said he was sorry.
I had to put that into his head. I had to ask him if he was sorry. I don't think he was sorry at all.
So several months later, Frank Fitzpatrick dialed that phone number again.
Hello, Mr. Porter?
Oh, speaking.
Hi, this is Frank Fitzpatrick calling again. I'm the one who called you back in February.
Oh, yeah.
Fitzpatrick asked Porter about that trip 30 years ago and the piece of mincemeat pie that had knocked out a little boy.
I don't know if it was alcohol or drugs or what. Well, if anything, no, it probably, the only thing is I know one thing, and it's still my favorite, is mincemeat. It has a rum in it. It gives a different flavor. There were a couple of girls that I heard you molested too. Not that I know of. No? That's not that I... When did you stop molesting children? When did you stop? Well, as far as I know now, I mean, for sure, it's way back in the 67. 67. Okay.
1967. That was when additional complaints from the parents in New Bedford finally led to his departure from the priesthood. The church had sent Porter for therapy to this retreat in New Mexico, though no therapy was offered to his victims.
Even though doesn't sound like it in my voice, I do have this extreme anger toward you for what you did to me. I don't blame you, yes. And my concern is that this might be another act, and that you might be molesting your own children or their friends or their friends. No, you could even check with my wife, and that is nothing. It would be, geez, it would have come out, yeah. And the family, I mean, it's been absolutely outstanding. I mean, I just thank God every day that what has taken place so far. It doesn't mean I don't have to struggle once in a while. I don't think I don't have recollection. I always got to look back and remember, my God, what happened. I mean, actually, how I got to look back, how fortunate I was that I didn't get creamed. Like, I just think to myself, I mean, it just doesn't know how would I react if anyone, touched my kid. I'd be so damn pissed.
At this point, Mrs. Porter picked up the telephone and said her husband had confirmed what Fitzpatrick had said.
Yes, he told me all about it after his call.
Okay. Okay, that's all I really wanted to talk to you.
Quite a shock.
Excuse me, yeah, it is quite a shock, I imagine, yeah. So, I'm just hoping that he's cured of that, that's all.
Well, there's no signs or anything.
No signs of any problems now?
Mm-hmm.
We say the family rosary every day, okay? Okay. I don't know if that still means anything to you or not. I hope it does. Did your wife discuss it? I just tell him I got a friend I want remembered, okay? That will include you in it. They're hoping that, like with me, none of us can get through anything without the grace of God. I know that.
After that phone call, James Porter admitted to a television reporter that he had probably molested 50 to 100 children. His victims scoff, saying that's just a fraction of the real number. And their constant fear is it didn't stop when he said it did. You know, he said in the tape that nothing has happened, that leaving the priesthood was a kind of cure for him.
Some people have this.
If you talk to the experts around pedophilia, it is a non-curable disease.
If you get that apology, will that give you all peace?
No. He's got to be put away.
In jail.
Treatment in jail.
Not a curable disease.
Diane, as far as I'm concerned, Porter committed murder.
No.
He psychologically murdered every one of us when we were 10, 11, 12 years old.
So the former children of St. Mary's School are determined to get action, even though so far every road has been a dead end. They turned to the Rhode Island district attorney, but just today he cited technicalities in the law and said he won't be doing anything. And the church?
Well, the church must always be the healing agent. I mean, the law is there to enforce the law, and we should never impede that. But
do you understand? These people say, excuse me, but they say they can't be healed until their church is fighting for them.
And I think we are. I think we are beginning to.
And yet, when Fitzpatrick first went public, Cardinal Bernard Law of Boston responded by attacking the messengers, the media.
By all means, let's call down God's power on the media.
So if the church wouldn't do it, we decided to go to Minnesota to see if we could get James Porter to say something to the victims he left behind.
Mr. Porter, may I talk with you?
For your ass.
Mr. Porter, may I speak with you on behalf of the people of Massachusetts? The young people there.
Get the police.
I'll be right back, Mr. Porter. You don't have to call the police. We just want to know if there's anything you want to say.
Get the cops. The cops.
Porter slammed our cameraman and our camera so hard, the camera shut down. It took 2 men to pull him off us.
He's not dealing with a helpless 12-year-old now. He's dealing with a very angry 43-year-old. And I'm not going to stop until that man is prosecuted, until he is dealt with, and until all the other victims who he victimized get help, come forward, and can face it.
As of now, more than 60 people linked by terror, memory, and love. All because of one man.
I've been alone for 32 years until I saw Frank on television. And I've got a family now. But up until that time, I thought I was alone. I owe, I don't know how much to Frank, because without his efforts, I wouldn't be able to deal with my pain right now.
Your hero?
He's my hero.
You're my hero now, too.
He's a very, very brave man. And
so are you.
I'm getting there.
You're there.
As we said, the Rhode Island District Attorney says he will not prosecute. Massachusetts officials are undecided. There are questions about statute of limitations. As for the church, 2 weeks ago, the National Conference of Catholic Bishops issued guidelines urging churches to identify pedophiles, turn them over to the authorities, and help the victims. But it's just a recommendation. It's not binding. And what about Father Porter in Minnesota? Well, the Boston Globe ran an article today which confirms something that we had heard. William Hutton, an officer in the police department in Oakdale, Minnesota, Porter's community, said he has now heard from 3 people raising questions, they say, about 10 years ago, Porter abused them as youngsters in the Midwest. But all 3 cases would exceed the 7-year statute of limitations.
Primetime. Now from New York, Diane Sawyer.
Sometimes our stories on Primetime close the chapter on a subject, but 3 weeks ago we brought you a story which only opened the floodgates to more. After we told you about Father James Porter, accused of abusing children in one Catholic parish after another in Massachusetts, our phones began to ring. New people came forward with information about Porter and the church that turned away from its children. It turns out not just in that little Massachusetts town, North Attleboro, but all across the country.
It became our secret for 30 years.
We were all ashamed. We were all ashamed.
3 weeks ago, we told you how this town's terrible secret surfaced because of one man named Frank Fitzpatrick. We told you how Fitzpatrick's 30-year-old memories reawakened of a favorite priest, a weekend outing, a 12-year-old boy betrayed.
The next thing I knew, I woke up and Father Porter was laying on top of me, sodomizing me.
Fitzpatrick decided to see if there might be others. The answer came back, a tidal wave of pain.
He threw me on the floor of the sacristy and raped me.
Once or twice a week.
I was 10 years old the first time.
Kept telling me that God was watching.
How many times did he molest me in my bedroom? I can't say 10, I can't say 15, I can't say 40.
In our broadcast, 22 people from that small Catholic community spoke out on camera. As of tonight, 60 have come forward, and all are convinced there are hundreds more.
He molested or raped every kid he could get his hands on. He destroyed hundreds of children's childhood.
And so that's why Fitzpatrick, a professional investigator, decided to track down Porter. He discovered that Porter had left the priesthood, was married, and living with his wife and 4 children in Minnesota.
Hi, this is Frank Fitzpatrick.
Yes?
From North Attleboro.
Yeah?
James Porter made no attempt at denial.
One question, why did you do that kind of thing?
Who knows?
You have anything to say to me about it? You know,
What can I say?
you're sorry?
Am I? Of course. Very. Very, very, very. That's why it was taken care of.
When did you stop molesting children? When did you stop?
Well, as far as I know now, I mean, for sure, it's way back in the, around 67.
67.
And indeed, in 1967, James Porter did go to a church treatment center in New Mexico. As we said in our broadcast, a center devoted to priests with problems. But Primetime has learned that despite what Father Porter said on the telephone, the trouble did not stop there. While Porter was being treated, he worked in this parish in southern New Mexico. But he was moved out after allegedly molesting boys on a church-owned boat. The men, who were 7 and 8 at the time, have not yet spoken out. Bruce Pasternak is their attorney.
He was as out of control in New Mexico as he had been in Massachusetts.
Pasternak also alleges that Porter served as a chaplain to a crippled children's hospital and abused the children there.
He was caught sodomizing a child who had recently had surgery and was confined to a body cast.
But a year later, there was no mention of this when the church sent out its letter of recommendation, saying after his treatment, Porter shows every sign of having recovered remarkably, that Porter had undertaken work in parishes in New Mexico and done very well. The letter was addressed to an unsuspecting little community in Minnesota.
You couldn't yell, you couldn't scream.
Sodomy, rape.
It got worse as time went on.
This man is a monster.
Primetime has learned of 16 people who say Porter abused them starting in 1969, after his treatment, when the church moved him to Bemidji, a quiet resort town in northern Minnesota. Dan Dow, Jim Grimm, and brothers Leo and Mark Smith are all former altar boys who told of their beguiling basketball coach and priest who did unspeakable things to children.
At the rectory, in the church, in the locker room, any opportunity that he had to abuse someone, in any way that you can imagine, he did it.
After 22 years, they were stunned to hear Porter's name on the news.
I read an article about Father Porter, and it just, boom, it just kind of blew me away.
It was like a big explosion within me. It was like...
It tore my heart out.
Like the children in Massachusetts, they didn't think their parents would believe them, and they were afraid of Porter, too.
He would make comments like, I'll slash your neck with a belt buckle, or things like that. It wasn't necessarily directed towards me, but I mean, the threat was there. And he was, I was just intimidated.
Last week, 2 of the men gave a press conference about Porter.
He told me that what was going on was part of becoming a man in the church. That this was part of becoming a better Catholic.
Dan Dow said that after a year of abuse, he was the 12-year-old boy who finally broke the silence.
I was the victim of Father Porter that finally went to my parents.
Immediately, the parents of Dow and Grimm got a lawyer and forced the bishop to get rid of Porter. That same day, Porter left Bemidji and eventually made his way back to treatment in New Mexico.
To find out that they knew about it before he was here, and that what we went through should never have happened, and looking back on it and saying, my childhood may have been different had I not been abused by this guy. But it's worse than murder, because we've got to live with it.
The whole town of Bemidji is in a state of outrage tonight, not just because of Father Porter and what he did 20 years ago, but the church that deceived its own diocese.
The treatment center recommended him, and they said, as we indicate, that he had recovered and given every sign of having his former problems under control.
Monsignor Mike Patnode is the spokesperson for the diocese, which includes Bemidji.
And I was personally appalled at the thought that this man whom we had seen, having caused so much pain in Massachusetts, that he had actually been in our diocese as well.
Last week, Dow, Grimm, and 5 other men in Minnesota filed suit against Porter, their local diocese, and the Diocese of Fall River, Massachusetts. Their attorney is Jeff Anderson.
The magnitude of devastation done by Father Porter to the humans and the magnitude of the level of knowledge and the concealment of it by the church in this case is comparable to none.
They put themselves up as an institution that guides morals, and they're hypocritical, and it's got to stop.
And what has the church said since our peace? Well, there's still no word from the priest we told you about, the one who allegedly walked in on Porter molesting the children, then shut the door and walked away.
Father Nunziato, we've talked to some of Father Porter's victims, and they say that you walked in the room and you saw them being abused. They want to know why you didn't protect them. They trusted you.
You want to just stop and talk for a moment?
And yet again, we tried to reach someone at the Vatican Embassy in Washington, D.C. Our call was never returned. And Father Porter, well, you'll remember his reaction when we tried to talk with him in Minnesota.
Mr. Porter, may I talk with you? Mr. Porter, may I speak with you on behalf of the people of Massachusetts? The young people there.
Get the police.
I'll be right back. Mr. Porter, you don't have to call the police. We just want to know if there's anything you want to say.
Get the cops.
At first, Porter said nothing about our broadcast in which he had said that the abuse stopped in 1967. But then, last week, with the knowledge of the new charges from Bemidji, he issued a statement saying he is sorry for the pain he caused, adding, "I was a very sick man while I was a Roman Catholic priest in the 1960s. I have not had sexual contact with any child since I left the priesthood in 1974. But Primetime has been told that Father Porter's statement is still not the truth. For the past 16 years, Porter has lived in a community called Oakdale, Minnesota, in 2 separate houses. The police in Oakdale now say they have reports from 3 people, all 3 neighbors at Porter's first residence. A man and 2 women who say Porter abused them well after 1974.
I just, was kind of confused and scared. Didn't exactly know what was going on.
Michael Huber says Porter pinned him against a car in the Porter's garage in 1978. Huber was 13.
The whole time he was holding me there, grinding, moving around like that, and telling me we could have some real fun, if you come back tomorrow, maybe we could have some real fun.
We aren't being accounted for, and I want him to come out and say, yes, I did still have this problem, and yes, it does reoccur.
For the first time, Porter's former babysitter is speaking out, a woman who asked to be identified only as Ann. She says she was a young teenager when the final incident of abuse occurred. He called her into the bedroom, put her hands on him. It was 1981.
He had an erection, and I just kind of stood there in shock for I guess I don't know how long, if it was a few minutes. So I just kind of stood there for I don't know how long, and then as soon as I realized what was going on and what might go on, I left.
Ann says she ran home, never to return to the Porter house again. Like the others, she told no one, thinking she was alone. And so, from Massachusetts to New Mexico to Minnesota, one by one, the victims of James Porter are coming forward, calling for justice from him and from the church they say turned away.
Last week, I had to do something that no parent should ever have to do. I had to tell my daughter about sexual abuse by a priest. And she said, "Daddy, why did the church let him do that to you?" And I sat and I thought for a minute. I said, "I don't know." And she said, "Daddy, why did the church let him do that to everybody, all his victims?" And I said, "I don't know." And I'm still waiting for an answer, and I honestly don't think that I will ever get one.
First, a note about prosecution. Because of the statutes of limitation in Massachusetts, Minnesota, and New Mexico, it's unlikely Porter will face criminal charges in any of those states. Now, after our piece, many of you asked questions about pedophilia. Here are some answers from the experts. They say that pedophilia is probably caused by some combination of child abuse and/or hormone, chromosomal, or brain abnormality. That those who experience it tend to recognize the desire when they reach puberty. That treatment is possible, including drugs and therapy, but listen to a foremost expert, Dr. Fred Berlin, who has been affiliated with Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. We told him about some of the things Porter said in that phone call.
And we figured out if we left, that might be the solution, and that was the solution.
Getting away from the being a priest, you mean?
Yeah, that was the biggest cure.
I'd be very reluctant to talk about a cure. You and I, when we're older, are still going to be attracted to the same kinds of people that we've been attracted to throughout most of our lives. That's the problem for the pedophile. They should never think of themselves as having become into a situation where they're no longer going to be tempted by children.
After that, I started, get a real interest. Well, maybe I'd like to get married and that too. So then we had more psychological tests to see how I was doing in that, and then they agreed everything is fine.
So someone who went through a brief treatment period, came out, says he got married, that took care of it. That's not the kind of treatment you're talking about.
I would have a high index of suspicion that this person would still be at risk of behaving in a similar fashion. And I would be very worried whether or not this individual is fooling themselves or perhaps fooling the rest of us.
Is one of the key things then keeping the temptation away, making sure that the person...
Absolutely. If you're an alcoholic, you don't want to work in a bar. In fact, I would make the point that the child is the pedophile in a sense what the bottle of alcohol is to the alcoholic.